You first saw it in June of 2019, but now, in March 2021, they're back for more. More monster trucks, more worlds, more monster truck mayhem in Monster Jam Steel Titans 2.
The real question is, though, is it better than the first game? And that, of course, is what we're here to answer. Now, just like with that first game, I want to thank Rainbow Studios, who developed the game, and THQ Nordic, who published it, for giving me early access to the second game for the purpose of this review. And actually, I was supposed to release this one yesterday, but I totally messed up the timeline, so we're putting it out today instead. Now, the game is already available for purchase. You can get it amongst other places on Steam. And with the last game, it was more of a pleasant surprise to me because I'm not a huge monster truck fan in real life. I don't go to those events. I don't follow the sport. I know about as much as most people do. And beyond that, I just know a couple of course, the main names like Gravedigger or Megalodon. In this game, you see some of those returning faces, but there is a focus on having more trucks, more worlds, and according to the developer's own website and the trailers, updated physics, updated AI in terms of being more competitive, and just more of a refined experience compared to the first game. Now, straight off the bat, I will say that I ended up playing more of this game than I did the first one, so that immediately is a point in its favour. However, there are definitely a couple of things which I think need to be noted about this game, which aren't necessarily strong points. The first one that I want to talk about is repetition. And this is something which really comes into play in the competition events, like the tournaments. When you're in an arena, you'll see some of the footage in this video where you're going around multiple laps against opponents trying to get the faster lap time, or for instance doing a time destruction challenge, or just a freestyle point-based trick challenge. Those, in my experience so far in the game, become very repetitive very quickly. And the only real motivation that the game gives you to continue with those is to unlock new trucks and upgrade existing ones. However, half of that feels somewhat pointless because the upgrades don't really make the trucks feel any different. You can, for instance, drive and fully upgrade a truck, as I did, for instance, with Blue Thunder, upgraded all of the specs from using it in a massive championship. But then, I moved to a new truck, the Higher Education School Bus, which is probably one of my favourite monster trucks, and it felt no different, even though it was completely unupgraded. But beyond that, what about the rest of the game? How do the graphics compare? How do the physics compare? Graphics-wise, I've got to be honest with you, I'm not going to buy into any hype here, I've got to call it as it is. I don't see a huge difference myself. I thought that the first game already looked pretty good for what it was trying to go for. Here the colours are still vivid and popping, the graphics are good enough for the kind of game that it is. The scenery, as I mentioned in that first review, is good once again here. But overall, I don't see a huge improvement, to be honest with you. Maybe if you did a side-to-side comparison, you might notice some more differences, but at least on the surface of things, even looking at the review that I did then compared to the footage now, I can't see a massive difference myself. In terms of physics, well, unfortunately for this game, I think I might actually give it to the first one, because even though I mentioned in that video that one of the strongest things about the physics in the game is that the trucks really felt like they had that weight to them, which is exactly what you want, in this game it's almost like they took those thoughts, and maybe from other people who said it as well, or maybe they just did it in general, and ran even further with it. So the trucks feel even heavier, even more cumbersome now. And even though, yes, that is more accurate to real life, it actually, to me at least, takes away from some of the manic, fun side of the game. Because as I mentioned in that first review, nobody's expecting this to be a super realistic simulation game. It is, at the end of the day, more about fun. It's essentially wrestling with trucks. So you're not expecting Gran Turismo or Forza out of this thing. That, to me at least, does feel more like what they were going for here. Heavier steering, the tricks aren't quite as over the top, you know, the amount of flips and spins that the truck can do feels a little bit more restrained, and some people might like that, but for me, it sort of undermines the fun factor that the first game had, at least for my experience and for my gameplay. In terms of the home world and the map, you drive from one location to another, unlocking new stuff. You've got 5 different world maps, 12 stadiums to race in, and incidentally 38 different trucks. In terms of unlocking the trucks, that is unfortunately, and this is a very old school way of thinking, and I alluded to this earlier on in the video, unlocking the trucks is basically the only main career progression that I was presented with. Like, that was the goal that you're given, to unlock all of these different trucks, and as I mentioned in that first review, the trucks are all just the same thing underneath with different bodies. So it's not like you're going into a conventional racing game and working your way from a Honda Jazz up to a, Formula 1 car. These are all just the same tier of truck with different bodies on. And as I mentioned earlier on, the difference in specs doesn't really mean that much in practice, because I was racing in a hard difficulty against trucks which were much higher. I was still racing in the training truck, which didn't even have a body on it and had the lowest specs in the game, and I was still beating them. So unlocking the higher stuff doesn't really mean anything beyond just representing which truck you happen to like. Now, all of this sounds a lot more negative than my review of the first game, and although I'm not going to say otherwise, I will say this isn't a bad game by any stretch. I will say though, it definitely has a very, very niched audience. In fact, one of the things I think works against this game a little bit is the audience is more niched for this one than the first one. And the reason for that is the first game in a new franchise, whatever the franchise is, will chances are draw in more fresh faces. People who aren't necessarily super fans of monster truck racing in this case, but they want to try something different, try something new. Whereas now, well, people already know what the game is going to offer from that first game, so chances are they're only going to buy it if they already liked that one. If you didn't play the first game, I'm going to go ahead and say, play the first one, because the first one to me has more of what you would expect from that kind of monster truck experience. It feels, to me at least, a little bit more over the top, and it's all the better for it. This game feels to me very much so for the fans, and I've said this before in other game types. Recently on the channel, I reviewed a game called Ducati 90th Anniversary, which came out in like 2015, 2016, and it's a specific motorcycle racing game just for Ducatis from the maker of the Ride series. There are other games like that as well. You've got Ferrari Challenge, Porsche Racing, Ducati World on the PS1. That kind of stuff is always going to be more niched because it's made just for fans of that brand first and foremost. And that, to harken back to my point, is the biggest difference between this game and the first one. The first one could appeal to a wider audience because it was something new, something fresh, and there was a lot of fun to it. This game, to me at least, feels much more for just the fans of monster truck racing. If you're new to the series, there's no real reason to play the second one first anyway, and if you are an existing fan, you already know what to expect, and it will offer probably a lot of what you want. As I said, I'm not a super fan of monster trucks, so I don't have the built-in attachment, which of course gives you kind of a leg up to begin with, where if you are a fan, you want the game to be even better. You will be wearing those rose-tinted goggles a little bit, and you'll enjoy it even more. There's nothing wrong with that. As I've said before, if there were games made about some of my favourite brands like Pagani Racing or something, chances are I would enter with a positive attitude and then work from there. Overall, to be honest, I would describe this game as being a perfectly acceptable entry into the monster truck or alternative racing game category. To me, it's not as groundbreaking as the first one felt to somebody like me who'd never played something like that before, and it doesn't feel as over the top or necessarily even as fun, in my opinion, as the first one did. It feels a little bit like it's treading the same water, maybe making some improvements or updates here and there, but overall, I found the first game's experience, if anything, a little bit more fun. Ultimately though, that's it for my thoughts, and as I said, if you're not an existing fan, I would recommend checking out their first game first, then perhaps if you absolutely love that one, come to this one. If, on the other hand, you are an existing fan, you absolutely love the first game, and you were clamouring for something new, well, chances are you probably don't need me to tell you to buy the game, because if you're that kind of fan, you've already got it anyway. Suffice it to say, if you are a monster truck fan and you enjoyed the first one, there will be more and slightly different things for you to enjoy here as an alternative, at the very least. So sure, check it out. For most of us, I would not call it a priority purchase, and if you do fancy trying out something like this, check out my review for the first game first, and maybe try out that game. Currently, of course, it would be a little bit cheaper, and you'll get a pretty accurate gauge as to whether or not you'll enjoy both of them. But that's it for this game review. Thank you once again to Rainbow Studios and THQ Nordic, who I've worked with a number of times on the channel and look forward to perhaps again in future, maybe this time in a couple of years again for a third game. And of course, if you do want to check out my other game reviews, including the ones that I mentioned in this video, then click the playlist right here on the screen to watch all of those as well. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.